Does
but
it?
we would hope that we could keep
Can we
it.
have the next slide or the slide after that? Just go, yeah, one more slide. Perfect, yeah.
Would you tell cities that aren't doing what, New York, New Jersey, Washington, the cities that have been taking charge in all of this, would you urge some of the cities that haven't been doing this, Mr. President, to get with the program?
Well, I would, but if you see New York, I believe the blue is New York is having a much harder time than other of the cities. Certain cities are doing, actually, you look down here, an incredible job. They were early, and they were very, very firm, and they've done an incredible job. This is New Jersey and New York. This is...
Remember California and Washington State were down here, and they had some of the earliest cases.
But we're seeing places in Florida not doing what New York, New Jersey have been doing, what Washington State has been
But
doing.
they're doing very well with comparison.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Maybe direct the question to you and then to Dr. Fauci as well. You told us yesterday that you're accomplishing, or the U.S. at least is accomplishing 100,000 tests per day, but we're still hearing difficult stories from the front lines of the first responders that you praised so appropriately a little while ago, that they can't test all of the people that they need to test. Do you have any kind of projection as to when everyone who needs a test will be able to receive one?
Yeah, I can only say that we're doing more than anybody in the world by far. We are testing highly accurate tests. These are tests that work. As you know, many tests are being sent to countries and they're broken. Well, we're doing, every day we get, and the word is exponential, we are getting more and more and more. And now we have the new test that you saw yesterday. That's going to be rolled out, I think, tomorrow or the next day. And that's going to take only a few minutes, literally a few minutes to see the result. And it's a highly accurate result. I mean, tests were given out by
Zacchaeus is very concerned and interested about what's going on with the
these are highly accurate tests.
coronavirus.
The tests that are coming out are very quick, and they were just developed. Abbott Labs did the one yesterday. So we're doing more than anybody in the world by far, and they're very accurate tests, and we're getting a lot of information from those tests.
And they're washing their hands regularly.
The test president unveiled
They all are.
yesterday the Abbott Laboratories test, which is a 15-minute test. Our team is working very closely with Admiral Joie and FEMA to make sure that those are distributed around the country. Earlier this week, Abbott Laboratories is actually going to be producing 50,000 tests a day and distributing those around America. There's already the machines in some 18,000 different locations.
Washing his face, licking his lips. He's really doing a good job. I'm quite proud of him. And I know the Vice President Pence and President Trump would be proud of him. Zacchaeus and Queen Esther.
Where there may be coronavirus
Queen Esther,
cases where there's been very
you're cleaning up also, aren't you?
But if I could just amplify one other point.
Yes, that's a good girl.
And that is that
I'm
when
proud
look
of
at
you.
this chart, go
President
back
would be
15
proud of you,
years.
and so would the Vice President and
The
Dr.
reality is
Fauci.
that, and this is me speaking as a layperson, but as I've listened to our experts, in New York and the greater New York City area have unique challenges. It's a city that we really believe may have had exposure to the coronavirus much earlier on than we could have known, and had its own challenges. In New York, Connecticut, New Jersey are leaning into this effort. But when we look at this chart for all the other states, including Washington State and California, it really does give evidence that, at least it begins to give evidence that the 15 days to slow the spread is working. And that in fact the American people are putting these things into practice in states across the country, including in New York and New Jersey, even though they've faced a greater magnitude of cases for certain circumstances that are related to international travel in those communities. But I think the
National shelter in place.
I know, I think the American people, what I'd suggest to you, James, the American people.
Zacchaeus
look at
is
these numbers in the other 48
listening to the
states,
Vice President
and they see
extensively,
that in the
and
last 15 days, the president's
so is
coronavirus
Queen Esther.
guidelines were working.
And as you can see, they're 6 feet apart from each other. And of course, Josie, she's Josephine, Josie we call her. She's on top of the
So right now, we're at about.
deaths that came out of the Talaferro house, the first home built in the city of Fort Thomas. She's up there and leaped up there for security, and so she's keeping herself separated from everybody and doing her job of keeping clean.
And I think if you ask Chris Murray, he would say he's using the information coming out of New York and New Jersey and applying that to potentially other states having the same outcomes. I just want to say again, this
Dr.
yellow
Deborah
line,
Burke.
the yellow line, and this is all corrected per 100,000 residents. So this is normalized, so we can compare apples to apples. This is still Washington State, this yellow. So they've been able to, for a long time of measuring cases, not have a spike. So it's possible, and we're watching very closely to make sure it doesn't have a spike. But that's what the people in Washington State are doing. This is what every community, Washington State early, about 2 weeks before New York or New Jersey. California, a week before New York or New Jersey. Really talked to their communities and decided to mitigate before they started seeing this number of cases. And now we know that that makes a big difference. Early, as Dr. Fauci said, if you wait till you see it, it's too late.
Do you have a demographic breakdown, Dr. Brooks, of where these deaths may occur?
So there's a demographic breakdown that we've discussed before related to mortality. And it's as we're seeing in New York exactly what we saw in Italy. Very low mortality, not to say that young people under 30 or young people under 40 aren't getting ill. They are, but most of them are recovering. So the profile looks identical to Italy, with increasing mortality with age and pre-existing medical conditions. And so that is holding in the same way. But what we're hoping is that through the work of communities, and again, it comes down to communities. This is communities deciding that this is important to them to not have the experience of New York and New Jersey. And I think, we are worried about groups all around the globe. I mean, I don't know if you heard the report this morning, there's 8,000 ventilators in the UK. If you translate that to United States, that would be like the United States having less than 40,000 ventilators. We have 5 times that amount. So, I mean, these are the things that everybody is having to face. And I think the United States is in an excellent position from our medical care position, but we don't want to have to test that system. We want this to be a much smaller epidemic with much smaller mortality.
Can I just follow up on the testing question real quick before we move on? So the testing numbers, I understand 1 million tests done is a big increase, but we were told there would be 27 million tests available by the end of the month. So can you outline where in the supply chain, where in the logistics chain are those other 26? Where are the other 26 million tests right now?
I think this is just for purposes of clarifications. There's a difference between sending a test that can be administered to a test being done. Because a month ago or more, the president brought together the top commercial labs in America and said, we need you to partner with us to create a brand new system that would rapidly process tests. We're now at 1.1 million tests, and we believe it's a fair estimate that we're testing about 100,000 Americans a day. That'll continue to grow. It'll continue to accelerate. But I think the misunderstanding early on was there were many tests being distributed, many test kits being sent, but under the old system, as the president's described it, the antiquated system, those were being processed in state labs or at CDC or in private labs on a very slow, methodical system that could only produce maybe 30 to 50 tests a day. But this new partnership that we have with commercial laboratories allows the progress we're making. But the breakthrough with Abbott Laboratories now moves to point of care, which means you're going to have devices and tests that people will literally be able to take at their doctor's office, at a hospital, at a clinic, at a nursing home, and have the results in 15 minutes.
So those 26 million tests we were talking about, were those tests under the old antiquated system? And
Yes.
now, so are we still even using those 27 million tests, or have we just completely moved on to the point?
The answer is yes, now
So,
for the new system.
even today, which is, I have to say, coming out of laboratories and developed tests and worked on vaccines and then gone to the field to actually combat epidemics, it is disappointing to me right now that we have about 500,000 capacity of Abbott tests that are not being utilized. So they are out, they're in the States, they're not being run and not utilized. So now we have to figure out, how do we create awareness? Because sometimes when you put an early platform out, like our first platform out when the high speed was Roche, so you get that out, people get dependent on that and then don't see that there's availability of other tests. So right now, there's over 500,000 tests sitting, capacity, that are not being utilized. So we're trying to figure out, how do we inform states about where these all are? How do we work through every laboratory association so they're aware? And how do we raise awareness so people know that there's point of care, there's Thermo Fisher, there's Abbott testing, and there's Roche. And if you add those together, that's millions of tests a week.
Not being reported.
And they're not, and so those are the
But they're
all,
not being reported.
or they're not even being used. So that's what's really, so that's what we're working on.
What's the reason?
Because when people get used to a single platform, they keep sending it back to that lab. So it's getting in a queue to wait to get on a Roche machine rather than being moved to this other lab that may have Abbott capacity. Because they're all in different laboratories. And so I think, well, actually Admiral Giroir is figuring it out to really create some kind of visual so that every governor and every health commissioner can see all of their capacity in their countries, in their states, county by county, so that they know where the tests are. So we pushed a lot of tests out.
Unbelievable
but they're not
task
all
and job.
utilized,
It's
and
up to the
so-
people, and they don't send them back.
I, for one, citizen, am very, very proud of what the president and vice president and these
Dr. Brooks explained it very,
professionals are
very well. I just
doing.
want to get back, John, to your question. It's a logical question. When you look at the number, you want to know what the demography is going to be. This is a number that we need to anticipate, but we don't necessarily have to accept it as being inevitable. And that's getting back to what I'm saying about, we can influence this to a varying degrees. And if we influence it to the maximum, we don't have to accept that. That's something we need to anticipate. But I want to do, not I, all of us want to do much, much better than that.
On that front, what do the models suggest is on the low end if you have full mitigation?
Well, it says,
That was
between
full
100 and
mitigation.
200.
That was full mitigation.
It says 100 to 200,000, anything with a lot of people, right? It's a lot of people. Well, you didn't ask the other question. What would have happened, because this is the question that I've been asking Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx for a long time, and they've been working on this for a long time. The question is, what would have happened if we did nothing? Because there was a group that said, let's just write it out. Let's write it out. What would have happened? And that number comes in at 1.5 to 1.6 million people, up to 2.2 and even beyond. So that's 2.2 million people would have died if we did nothing. We just carried on our life. Now, I don't think that would have been possible, because you would have had people dying all over the place. This would not have been a normal life. How many people have even seen anybody die? You would have seen people dying on airplanes. You would have been seeing people dying in hotel lobbies. You would have seen death all over. So I think from a practical standpoint, that couldn't have been carried out too far. But if you did nothing on the higher side, the number would be 2.2 and maybe even more, and on the lower side, 1.6 million people.
Understood, but if 100,000 is the number with full mitigation, how do you push it? How do you push it lower?
So, yeah, we'll go together. We've been at this a long time. You go first.
So, John, it's an obvious, very good question. If this is full mitigation and it's 100,000, why am I standing here saying I want to make it better? Because that's what the model tells you it's going to do. What we do is that every time we get more data, you feed it back in and relook at the model. Is the model really telling you what's actually going on? And again, I know my modeling colleagues are going to not be happy with me, but models are as good as the assumptions you put into them. And as we get more data, then you put it in, and that might change.
That improves
So even
the
though it says according
possibilities
to the model, which is a good model,
of
that
the
we're dealing
assumptions.
with, this is full mitigation. As we get more data, as the weeks go by, that could be modified.
Yes.
Why does the model now, the top line on the lowball estimate, why does that not talk about it? I think it said 240,000, not 200,000. Is that a change? Is that because the states haven't been doing enough?
You know, it just has to do with if you had more New Yorks and New Jerseys, you know, Chicago, Detroit, LA, Dallas, Houston, you know, all of our major cities modeled like New York. That's what gets us into trouble. But I am reassured by looking at the Seattle line, by looking at the LA line, by looking at what California's been able to do, that that is not something that I don't believe that's going to happen. That is the outside case of having 10, 15 metros like New York and the New Jersey metro area.
But New York had community spread pretty early undetected, so don't many of those other states, if not more of them, who've had even less information, aren't they likely to see the same spike?
Well, California and Washington State reacted very early to this. Yes, Washington State had some of the earliest infections. They have kept it low and steady, and for now a month has been tracking it with a small increase in the number of cases, but not this logarithmic form of the virus. And so that's the piece that we're trying to prevent. That's the piece that we're trying to prevent in New Orleans, in Detroit, in Chicago, and in Boston right now. And trying to make sure that each of those cities work more like California than the New York metro area.
Mr. President, I just wanted to get your thoughts on face masks. We asked you about this yesterday, and you signaled you were thinking about it.
Just to end the last topic, though, I think I can say this because I spoke to Dr. Birx before and to Dr. Fauci. For whatever reason, New York got up to a very late start. And you see what happens when you get off to a late start. New Jersey got off to, and I think both governors are doing an excellent job, but they got off to a very late start. When you look at Washington State, if you remember, that all started in a very confined nursing home. And you had 20 some odd people, I believe, dying in one home. That doesn't mean it escaped that home. And so they have a very different statistic than other states. But I mean, I remember it very vividly, the nursing home in Washington State, where you had many people dying. Every day people were dying in one exact location. So they were able to keep that, relatively speaking, into that location.
One second. Were you surprised when you saw these projections? The numbers are sobering.
They're very sobering. Yeah, when you see 100,000 people, that's at a minimum number. Now, what we're looking at, and as many people as we're talking about, whatever we can do under that number and substantially under that number, we've done that through really great mitigation. We've done that through a lot of very dedicated American people. That 100,000 is, according to modeling, a very low number. In fact, when I first saw the number, and I asked this a while ago, they said it's unlikely you'll be able to attain that. I think we're doing better than that. Now, I think we have to see, but I think we're doing better than that, because as John said, that would be, a lot of lives taking place over a relatively short period of time. But think of what would have happened if we didn't do anything. I mean, I've had many friends, business people with great, actually, common sense. They said, why don't we write it out? A lot of people have said, a lot of people have thought about it. Write it out. Don't do anything. Just write it out and think of it as the flu. But it's not the flu. It's vicious. When you send a friend to the hospital and you call up to find out how is he doing, it happened to me, where goes to the hospital, he says goodbye, he's sort of a tough guy, a little older, a little heavier than he'd like to be, frankly. And you call up the next day, how's he doing? And he's in a coma? This is not the flu. So we would have seen things had we done nothing. But for a long while, a lot of people were asking that question, I think, right? I was asking it Also, I mean, a lot of people were saying, well, let's just write it out. This is not to be written out, and because then you would have been looking at potentially 2.2 million people or more, 2.2 million people in a relatively short period of time. If you remember, they were looking at that concept. It's a concept, I guess, you know, it's a concept. If you don't mind death, a lot of death. But they were looking at that in the UK, remember? They were very much looking at it. And all of a sudden they went hard the other way because they started seeing things that weren't good. So they were, you know, they put themselves in a little bit of a problem. Now Boris tested positive, and I hope he's going to be fine. But in the UK, they were looking at that, and they have a name for it, but we won't even go by the name. But it would have been very catastrophic, I think, if that would have happened. But that was something that everybody was talking about, Steve. Like, just don't do anything. Don't do anything. Forget about everything. Just write it out. They use the expression, write it out. We would have had, at a minimum, 1.5, 1.6, but you would have had perhaps more than 2.2 million people dying in a very short period of time. And that would have been a number that the likes of which we've never seen. So now when we look at our package that we just approved for $2 trillion, all of a sudden it seems very reasonable, right? When you're talking about 2 million lives, all of a sudden it seems very reasonable. I must say, a lot of people that have been seeing the more advanced numbers, because these are much more advanced numbers now. You know, when you first started, we didn't know, and this was a different kind of a virus, and nobody knew that much about it. Even the experts, you don't really know where it's going. But then they see what goes on in Italy, and they see what goes on in Spain. And you see France is having a very hard time, and other countries having a very, very hard time.
Well,
Once they see
Josephine's
what's
come
going
down
on,
off her
they
perch.
start making projections. So I hope they're going to be very high projections, but based on everything else, that would be the number. Let's see if we can do much better
Jack's
than
still
that.
sitting over there resting now, listening to the president.
Okay.
Well, I understand there's an issue with supplies,
That's
but
right.
if there
Well,
was enough for everyone.
you know, you can use a scarf. A scarf is, everybody, a lot of people have scarves, and you can use a scarf. Scarf would be very good. And my feeling is if people want to do it, there's certainly no harm to it. I would say do it, but use a scarf if you want, you know, rather than going out and getting a mask or whatever. We're making millions and millions of masks, but we want them to go to the hospitals. I mean, one of the things that Dr. Fauci told me today is we don't want them competing. We don't want everybody competing with the hospitals where you really need them. So you can use scarves. You can use something else over your face. It doesn't have to be a mask. But it's not a bad idea, at least for a period of time. I mean, eventually you're not going to want to do that. You're not going to have to do that. This is going to be gone. It'll be gone. Hopefully gone for a long time.
Mr. President, the mitigation steps that are on your 30-day plan, is that enough or is more needed? Have you been
Well, we're going to
discussing
find
that?
out. We hope it's enough. We hope it's enough. We hope we're at a level where we can say, let's go, because our country wants to get back to work. We really want to get back. Everybody wants to get back to work. Now, I could ask the doctors to answer that question, but we discuss that all the time. What do you think?
Have they been recommending harsher
Well,
mitigation
I think we've been very harsh. I mean, you look at the streets. I looked at Fifth Avenue today on camera, and I didn't see anybody walking on the street. And I'm used to watching that street. You can't even see. You can't see the asphalt. You can't see the concrete. And you look at this, nobody. There was one car. It looked like it might have been a taxi cab, and it was in a time of the morning that normally there'd be a lot of people. I mean, you know, I think the mitigation's been very strong. Please.
Mr. President, will you confirm your plans to defer tariff payments for 90 days? And secondly, on
I
interest...
didn't do anything about tariff payments. I don't know who's talking about tariff payments. They keep talking about tariff payments, and we haven't done that. China's paying us, we made a deal with China. Under the deal, they're paying us 25% on $250 billion, and they pay it. And I spoke with President Xi the other day, and he didn't mention that. We didn't mention that. We had a great conversation, by the way, a really productive conversation having to do with many things. Most of it was on the virus, but you know, We're not talking, who are you with? Who are you with?
If I could just clarify,
Who are you with?
Wall Street Journal. There's reporting by Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg that there's a plan in
Well, I know
motion
it's incorrect reporting.
to,
Well, they might be, but I'm gonna have to approve the plan. The one thing I will tell you, I approve everything, and they haven't presented it to me. So therefore, it's false reporting. So therefore, don't do the story. If we're going to do something, I'd be glad to let you know. There's nothing wrong with doing it, but we'll let you know. Yeah, please, we have a couple of facts, then we'll get back to you, John. Go ahead.
Thanks, sir. Phil Boydman with Throughfire Politics. I wanted to ask you about individual states issuing stay-at-home orders. What do you think, for instance, in Florida, Ron DeSantis has resisted urges to issue one of those, but he said moments ago that if you and the rest of the task force recommended one, that would weigh on him heavily. What sort of circumstances need to be in place for you to make that call and say this is something you should consider?
Different kind of a state, also great governor, knows exactly what he's doing, has a very strong view on it. And we have spoken to Ron. Mike, you want to just tell him a little bit about that?
Well, let me echo our appreciation for Governor DeSantis' leadership in Florida. He's been taking decisive steps from early on and working closely with our team at the federal level. But let me be very clear on this. The recommendation of our health experts was to take the 15 days to slow the spread and have the president extend that to 30 days for every American. Now, that being said, we recognize that when you're dealing with a health crisis in the country, it is locally executed by healthcare workers, but it's state managed. And so we continue to flow information to state governors. We continue to hear about the data that they're analyzing and consult with them. But at the president's direction, the White House Coronavirus Task Force will continue to take the posture that we will defer to state and local health authorities on any measures that they deem appropriate. But for the next 30 days, this is what we believe every American in every state should be doing at a minimum to slow the spread.
So unless we see something obviously wrong, we're gonna let the governors do it. Now, if it's obviously wrong, I mean, people can make things, they can make a decision that we think is so far out that it's wrong, we will stop that. But in the case of Governor DeSantis, there's two thoughts to it, and two very good thoughts to it. And he's been doing a great job in every respect, so we'll see what happens. But we only would exercise if we thought somebody was very obvious. Go ahead, your turn.
Thanks. I had a question in a minute for the Vice President about the National Strategic Stockpile, but while you're at the podium, I wanted to ask about your call with President Putin a couple days ago. Yeah. I know a big economic concern for a lot of people has been the state of oil prices right now. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you raised that with President Putin, if you were able to.
We did. We had a call that was probably about that, the oil prices, because as you know, Russia and Saudi Arabia are going at it, and they're really going at it, and by going at it to the extent that they are, the oil has dropped to a point where, it's the greatest tax cut we've ever given, if you look at it that way, because people are gonna be paying 99 cents for a gallon of gasoline. It's incredible in a lot of ways. It's gonna help the airlines, but at the same time, it's hurtful to one of our biggest industries, that's the oil industry. It's really, it's not even feasible what's going on. So I spoke to President Putin about that. I also spoke to the Crown Prince about that, Saudi Arabia. And now I think, they're gonna get together, and we're all gonna get together, and we're gonna see what we can do, because you don't wanna lose an industry. You're gonna lose an industry over it. Thousands and thousands of jobs. We have, I don't know if you know, there's oil all over the oceans right now. The boats are all filled. The ships they're renting ships that were dying, that weren't doing well, and now, that's where they're storing oil, and they're sent out to sea, and they sit there for long periods of time. There's so much oil. In some cases, it's probably less valuable than water. In some parts of the world, water is much more valuable. So we've never seen anything like it. But the two countries are discussing it, and I am joining at the appropriate time if need be. We had a great talk with President Putin. We had a great talk with the Crown Prince. We also discussed, more so with President Putin in this case, the virus, because Russia's being hit pretty hard. And we discussed many things, trade, we discussed a lot of things with both, but in the case of both, we very much discussed the oil and the oil prices. I mean, you look, it's $22, but it's really much cheaper than that if you want to negotiate. Nobody's seen that. That's like from the 1950s. It really is, you know, to think that it was 50, 60, 70, 80, and now it's 22, but you know, if you put a good bid in at 9, I think you could probably get what you wanted, right? John, please.
Mr. President, you tweeted earlier today that now would be a good time to start looking toward, if there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and work on an infrastructure bill. Again, you suggested it should be $2 trillion, which is twice what the last one was, or the proposal at least. Are you anticipating that, like after the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, America will need to have so-called shovel-ready jobs ready to go to get people back to work?
Well, the problem with that one is they had maybe shovel-ready jobs and maybe not, but they never used it for the purpose of infrastructure. So far, nobody's been able to find any money that was spent on infrastructure. I want to use it for infrastructure. And one of the reasons I'm suggesting it, John, is we're paying zero interest. The United States is paying almost zero interest rate. The Federal Reserve lowered the rate, the Fed rate, and that in a combination of the fact that everybody wants to be in the United States. You know, we have a dollar that's very strong, and I know that sounds good, but it does make it hard to manufacture and sell outside because other currencies are falling and our currency is very strong. It's very, very strong. Proportionately, it's through the roof. So we have a strong dollar. People want to invest in the United States, especially nowadays where they're looking at safety. They have all of the problems, plus the virus at 151 countries. They all want to come into the United States. And so we have a zero interest rate, essentially. And I said, wouldn't this be a great time to borrow money at zero interest rate and really build our infrastructure like we can do it? So the plan was, the Republicans had a plan of about 750. I would say they were at 7.5. Well, you had the Democrats were a little less than $1 trillion. The Republicans were a little bit less than that. And I'm suggesting $2 trillion. We redo our roads, our highways, our bridges. We fix up our tunnels, which are many of them in bad shape, like coming into New York, as you know, a lot of really bad shape. And we really do a job on our infrastructure. And that doesn't mean we're going to do the Green New Deal, because I won't do it. I won't approve it. We're not going to do the Green New Deal and spend 40% of the money on things that people just have fun with.
How would you pay for it, sir?
We're going to borrow the money at 0% interest. So our interest payments would be almost zero, and we can borrow long term. People want to be in the United States. They want to be invested in the United States. Go ahead, Jim.
I wanted to get back to the virus. You were saying at the beginning of the press conference that you're looking at holding back 10,000 ventilators. Is that because you need to pick and choose where these ventilators are going to have to go because of the nature of the pandemic?
Right.
And how it's spreading? And also, I just wanted to ask Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, if it's possible after you finish, is that part of the reason why you're projecting 100,000 to 200,000 deaths? That there are going to be some people who aren't going to be able to get ventilators?
Well, actually, just the opposite, because we're holding back. We have almost 10,000, and we're holding because we're going to need them over the next couple of weeks as the surge goes over. You see the chart. We haven't hit the top yet, and we have to be able to move them immediately. And we can't take them because it's going to be very hard to do that. We can't take them to places that aren't needing them. Plus, we have requests for ventilators in hospitals and in states and cities that don't need them, in our opinion. They don't need them. They won't need them at the top. So we're holding it back for flexibility. We actually just took 600 and we sent them to different locations today. But we have close to 10,000, and we'll be able to get them, and we're all set to march. We have the National Guards and we have FEMA, and we're all set to move them to the places. So as per your second question, what we're going to do is save lives because of it, because otherwise we would not be able to get to the ventilators. And we don't know what the hottest spot is.
Ventilator shortage right now?
In some areas we might, but we've done a great job with ventilators, and we're having them made. Unbelievable. We have now 11 companies making ventilators. Now they'll be starting to arrive in the next week, but we've also grabbed a lot of them. Some hospitals had more than they were saying, or at least more than we knew about, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. But we want to be able to have, I guess the word would be flexibility, so that if the surge turns out to be much stronger in Louisiana, which it could, that we can immediately bring 1,000 or 2,000 to Louisiana. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to get them. We wouldn't be able to say, listen, Governor Cuomo in New York, we want to take ventilators away from New York. And they'll say, well, we can't do that. It would be a disaster. So we have great flexibility. Now, when the surge occurs, if it occurs fairly evenly, we'll be able to distribute them very quickly before they need them. But we have a reserve right now. It's like having oil reserves, except more valuable, frankly. But we have a reserve right now, and we'll be able, and we also have a great team of people ready to deliver. They can move them fast. So when we see it going up in a certain state, and Louisiana could be one, and Michigan could be another with Detroit, because Detroit is having a lot of hard time right now. Detroit came out of nowhere, and that's what happens with this. It comes out of nowhere. So we are ready, Jim, depending on what happens, and we have a stockpile, and that's why it's called the stockpile. And a lot of the ventilators and a lot of the other equipment, rather than sending it to the stockpile, we had it sent directly to a hospital, to a location, to a place. So we didn't have the cumbersome nature of having it come in, unboxed, put in, and then delivered. We have it brought, which they've never done before. They don't do that. Generally speaking, they don't do that. But I think, Mike, we've had tremendous success at doing that. That's for other items, including ventilators, where it's brought to the site that needs it. But we have a good supply of ventilators, and we're ready to go. We're all ready. We have trucks ready. We have everything ready, because, as we're saying, John, this could be a hell of a bad 2 weeks. This is going to be a very bad 2 and maybe even 3 weeks. This is going to be 3 weeks like we haven't seen before.
Should the hospitals be prepared for that? We're hearing
Well, I
some
think the hospitals,
that they're facing what looks like a medical war zone in some of these places.
they are going to be facing a war zone. That's what it is. I've heard some of the paramedics and some of the doctors. They said they've been in war zones. They've never seen anything like this. You look at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. I've never seen. I just think it's so, because that's a hospital that's near where I grew up.
Well, Travels with the Stevensons, we hope you've enjoyed the news conference today. But and I hope tomorrow that House Bill 451 passes in the state legislature in Kentucky, with our senators and representatives voting and then concurring, and then sending it on over to the governor for his signature, or if he vetoes it, then coming back and overriding it with the legislature to stop the abortions that give the Attorney General the authority to do so. And here in Kentucky, under the constitutional section 446, gives them, the legislature, the ability to pass this law, introduced by, I believe it was Stan Lee. God bless you, and thank you very much for watching today. Travels with the Stevensons, 859-750-0000. I'm going to get back now to our anniversary celebration with Miss June, Diamond Stevenson, and we enjoyed our great meal from Oriental Walk that we brought home from the carry-out. It was absolutely delicious, and all the folks there, Mike Wong and all the folks there that have had to shut down the restaurant on the inside that we've gone to for 31 years. But we certainly had the good food today, didn't we, June? Amen. So give us a holler. Watch us on YouTube and Facebook, Travels with the Stevensons, and under John Stevenson, and 859-750-0000. And if you're calling Frankfurt about that bill, it's give them a call. Down there you can see it on our post and on our YouTube. God bless you and have a great day.